Hello and welcome. Tonight, we drift backward, through centuries of silence and wind, into the golden glow of the Nile Valley, to a world shaped by sunlight, by stone, and by unyielding ritual. You may have heard the tales of pharaohs and gods, of towering pyramids and treasure-filled tombs, but those legends are only one side of the story. Tonight, we'll slip quietly through the lesser-seen corridors of history, where sandals scrape dust across hard-packed floors, where callous hands lift amphorae and tend fires, and where names were rarely written but lives were deeply lived. This is a world of the ancient Egyptian servant. Not a villain, not a hero, just human, just like you. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so we have more motivation to produce better quality products. And now, let's begin with the rhythm of their days. Part 1, Sweat and Sand. Life beneath the Pharaoh. Imagine yourself in Egypt, not the Egypt of gleaming obelisks and treasure-filled tombs, not the Egypt of divine pharaohs and triumphant conquests, but another Egypt, a quieter Egypt, the one where sandals scuffed against packed clay roads, where the sun rose early and unforgiving, and where the heartbeat of the kingdom thumped not from palaces or pyramids, but from mud-brick homes, temple kitchens, and fields of golden grain. You live in this Egypt. Perhaps you are a servant in the household of a middle-ranking scribe, or you serve in the state of a temple priest, or maybe in the villa of a provincial noble. Wherever you are, your name is unlikely to be written down. Your portrait will not be painted in rich colors upon tomb walls. No golden mask will rest upon your face when you die. But still, you are here, breathing, working, enduring. Let us walk through your day. You wake before the sun. You always do. Long before the first golden light begins to edge over the desert hills, before the river stirs, before birds call from the reeds, the night air is still cool. For a few brief minutes, your clay wall room offers a pocket of peace, a soft hush before the world demands your body again. Your bed is a mat of woven reeds. Your headrest is carved wood, hard but familiar. You stretch your arms and rub the sleep from your eyes, already anticipating the weight of the water jars, the sting of sand in your sandals, the clatter of morning tasks. You live in a servant's quarter, a modest cluster of rooms tucked behind the main villa or bordering the outer wall of an estate. The walls are made of sun-dried mud brick, simple, warm in winter, sweltering in summer. The floors are packed earth, occasionally scattered with straw or mats to keep down the dust. A single small window lets in the faint light of early dawn, and a jug of water stands in the corner, left over from the previous day. You rise and wrap your linen around your waist. The cloth is coarse and plain, dyed no color, worn thin in places but serviceable. You step into the courtyard where the other servants are beginning to stir. One is sweeping the walkway with a stiff bundle of reeds. Another tends to the small fire pit, coaxing yesterday's embers back into flame. The cook is already awake. You can hear the hollow grind of millstone as she prepares grain for the master's bread. The first task of your day is water. It is almost always water. You take 2 ceramic amphorae and hoist them to your shoulders, walking the familiar path to the estate's well, or, if you're unlucky, to the public one beyond the villa walls. Your footsteps are slow and measured. The jars are heavy, and any spill is a waste that must be walked again. Others are walking too. Other servants, other laborers, some with donkeys, some barefoot like you. The air is cool but dry, and the dust clings to the sweat on your arms. You may see the baker's boy passing with a wide, shallow basket of unbaked loaves, his arms powdered with flour, heading to the communal oven. A temple singer, veiled and robed, hurries by, already late to the morning rites. Life stirs early here. Everyone has a rhythm, and yours begins with water. By the time you return, the sun is peaking above the rooftops. The courtyard begins to fill with light. The heat of the day has not yet arrived, but it is coming. You can feel it in the way the shadows shorten. Back inside the villa, the master's household is stirring. You can hear doors opening, the padding of soft leather sandals on stone floors, a child's voice calling for sweet beer. You and the others begin to move faster now. The courtyard must be swept clean. The floors inside the house must be wiped down with damp cloths. Dust must be chased from corners. The shrine in the corner of the reception room, a small statue of Bess or Hathor, perhaps, must be tidied. Offerings placed, incense lit. Throughout the day, the tasks multiply. You mend linens. You prepare fresh rushes for bedding. You press olives, clean jars, chase geese from the vegetable patch. You scrub soot from lampstands. Sometimes you are sent with a message to another estate, or down to the river to fetch papyrus stems. Each task is small, but they never stop. In the kitchen, if you are assigned there, the heat will follow you like a second skin. The cook gives quick, precise instructions. You grind barley, your knees aching from kneeling. You peel onions and garlic. You gut small fish in the river. Their smell sharp and insistent. You wrap meat in salt and place it carefully in clay jars. You check the dough that has been rising under a cloth since last night, now puffy and warm to the touch. Bread is life. Every meal begins with it. You shape flat rounds and place them on the hot stones. You watch them puff, turn golden, then lift them off with practiced care. The master's family will expect bread with everything. If it burns, if it is too flat, too hard, there will be words, perhaps more. Meanwhile, another servant tends to the master's clothes. She shakes out his white linen tunic, freshly washed and laid to dry the night before. She folds it with care, smoothing each crease with her hands. A boy polishes his sandals, rubbing beeswax into the leather to make it gleam. Someone else draws a bath with heated water, adding dried herbs to perfume it. The master must be clean and fresh before his guests arrive. Guests, the word alone brings extra tension. When visitors come, everything must be perfect. Mats are straightened. Fresh flowers are arranged in clay vases. More bread must be baked. Wine must be poured and fruit prepared. You might be tasked with standing silently near the doorway, ready to refill cups or fan flies away from platters. You are not to speak unless spoken to. You are to be invisible, efficient, obedient. As midday approaches, the sun blazes overhead. The heat settles on your shoulders like a weight. Your tunic sticks to your skin. Sweat beads along your neck. The rooms of the villa offer some shade, but the stone walls radiate warmth and the air is still. If you're fortunate, the master permits a brief pause during the hottest hour. You sit in the shade, sipping weak beer from a shared cup, chewing on bread with lentils or dried figs. You speak quietly with the other servants. You share news, small jokes, complaints, but never too loudly, never too long. In the afternoon, the pace resumes. Floors must be swept again. The shrine tidied once more. Perhaps the children need watching. They run through the halls, laughing, scattering sand from their sandals. You guide them gently, keep them from breaking anything precious. You fetch their toys, wooden animals, clay dolls, balls made from leather. They rarely say thank you, but sometimes they smile. If you work in a temple household, your duties may include sacred tasks. Fetching water for ritual purification, cleaning tools used in ceremonies, tending to sacred animals, a cat, perhaps, or a goose, lighting incense for the daily offerings. Here, your movements must be even more precise. The gods do not tolerate disorder. You are not permitted into the inner sanctum, but you feel its weight nearby, the solemn hush, the scent of frankincense that clings to your tunic long after you leave. By early evening, the villa glows in golden light. The master returns if he was away. His sandals are dusty. He calls for wine. You bring it. He sits on a low stool while his wife speaks of the day. You remain quiet, observing. Ready, dinner is prepared. A stew of lentils and herbs. Flatbreads warm from the oven. Dates stuffed with nuts. The master eats first. The children next. The servants eat last. When the dishes have been cleared and washed, when the guests have gone, when silence settles over the household, you eat simply, bread, beans, maybe a bit of salted fish if there is extra. You sit in the servants' courtyard, legs tucked beneath you, speaking softly under the stars. Your back aches, your hands are raw, but your belly is full. For tonight, that is enough. Sleep comes slowly. The air is still hot. Mosquitoes hum near your ears. You lie on your mat again, staring at the cracked ceiling above, listening to the familiar rhythm of another servant snoring nearby. Your eyes close, your breath slows, and tomorrow it begins again. Always again, always again. But what does that always mean? It means you rarely have days off. Festivals come, and they are welcome. The Festival of Opet, for example, or the Feast of the Valley. On such days, if your master is in good spirits, your work might pause for a few hours. You might be permitted to watch the procession. You see priests marching in columns, their robes spotless, their chants rolling like slow music through the alleys. Incense curls upward, thick and perfumed. Myrrh, frankincense, resin from distant lands. The air shimmers with heat and holiness. You stay on the edges of the crowd. Of course, you are not dressed finely enough to approach. But still, you feel something lift in your chest. A moment of reverence, a softness and rhythm of the day. There are other duties during festivals too. The master's house must be cleaned more thoroughly. Offerings are prepared. Special meals are cooked. Banners may be hung. Everything is heightened. There is celebration. Yes, but also greater responsibility, greater pressure. The joy of the elite depends on the labor of the unseen. And so you work, you endure, you learn the quiet ways of resilience. You find small pleasures, a cool drink of water from a shaded jar, the feel of clay on your fingers when you help mend a broken vessel, the rustle of palm leaves as wind threads through the trees. You learn to enjoy the patterns of repetition, the comforting predictability of tasks. Over time, you begin to know the house intimately. You know where the floor creaks, where the pots are kept, which doors stick in the heat of summer. You know which child is gentle, which one lies. You know the rhythms of your fellow servants, who rises early, who complains under their breath, who sings to themselves when they think no one hears. There are hierarchies even among servants. The steward oversees the house and speaks to the master directly. The cook commands the kitchen and has her own opinions. The linen keeper counts and measures with quiet pride. Newer servants listen and watch, learn the unwritten rules. Some roles are more visible, others more valued. All, however, are bound by duty. Sometimes, they're visiting dignitaries. Their arrival is always accompanied by hurried preparation. New mats are unrolled. Scented oil is dabbed onto doorposts. Flowers are strewn in pathways. You may be asked to bring towels or oil for bathing or more wine than usual. These are days of exhaustion, but they also bring stories. New faces, news from distant cities, Thebes, Memphis, perhaps even traders from Byblos or Nubia. Your world is small but not blind. You hear things. You absorb them quietly. You know of droughts upriver, of grain prices rising, of the scribe dismissed in disgrace, of a boy who ran away from his post, caught and whipped. These stories circulate like the wind, soft, sometimes sharp. The seasons change. You feel them not in temperature so much as in labor. During the inundation, when the Nile floods its banks and the fields disappear beneath water, agricultural work ceases. The land rests. And so, attention turns inward to repair, to building, to temple service. This is a time when state labor is often conscripted. If your household owes labor, your name might be chosen. Then you are sent not to serve the house, but the nation. You might be assigned to a building crew, carrying stones, mixing mud and straw to form bricks, lifting scaffolding. The sun is relentless. The foremen shout. There is little rest. Still, many endure it with a kind of dull pride. You are building something larger than yourself. You are helping raise walls that will outlast generations. Back at home, your duties remain. Your body learns a movement of repetition. Sweeping, kneading, scrubbing, serving. Even your dreams begin to echo your waking hours. You dream of carrying water, only to wake and do it again. And yet, there are joys, small and fleeting. A fig split open under the sun. A song hummed quietly among friends. A moment when a child laughs and wraps their arms around your leg. A night when the stars are clear and sharp, and you lie on a rooftop to sleep, the whole sky open above you. You find comfort in faith, not the grand rites of the priests, but in your own quiet prayers. You light a lamp before the small figure Tauret, goddess of protection. You place an offering of bread beside a stone carving a bess. You whisper thanks to the river. You ask the wind to spare the crops. Your beliefs live in your gestures. Not loud, but constant. You are a servant, but you are also a witness. To history, to life as it truly was. And now, the stars return. You lie down once more on your woven mat. The clay walls hold the heat of the day. The sounds of the villa quieten. You listen for the hush that means the master's household has gone to sleep. And slowly, breath by breath, so do you, tomorrow will come. The same, and not the same. A rhythm, a life. The sand waits. The sun returns. The story continues. And so does your role in it. Let us walk a little further now. Not just through the tasks of the day, but through the structure that surrounds you. The layers that hold your life in place like bricks in the estate walls. The household itself is a world of its own. It has rules and rhythms, hierarchies and territories. There's a master's family, of course, the noble or priest or scribe whose power anchors the space. Then his wife, often managing the household's daily affairs with a firm hand. The children, cared for by wet nurses, tutors, and you. Below them, a hierarchy among the servants. At the top might be the household steward, managing supplies and relaying orders. Beneath them, the cook, the linen keeper, the groom, the potter. Some are specialists, others general helpers. Some were born into the house's service, others brought in during famine or debt, others captured during campaigns in Nubia or Libya, now living as servants or even as slaves. You might not know which day you arrived. Time and service blurs. Was it 10 seasons ago? 12? You remember the way your feet ached that first week, the fear of making a mistake, of forgetting a name, of dropping a vessel. Now you move with practiced ease, slipping through rooms like a shadow, every gesture efficient and quiet. Some servants carry messages. These are trusted positions. They pass between homes, temples, markets. They hear stories, see streets, sometimes travel distant cities. If you are clever and lucky, you might be chosen for such a role. But with trust comes danger. A wrong word spoken, a name repeated. Punishment is never far. There's a granary on the estate. You do not go inside unless ordered. It is watched, accounted for. The grains within are carefully measured. This is power. Grain feeds a household, pays the workers, fills offerings at the temple. It is stored like treasure. And sometimes you dream of stealing just a handful more, just enough to feel full. But you don't. The risk is too great. You may tend the animals. Goats, donkeys, geese. They bleat and bray and hiss. They require feeding, cleaning, care. And if you are gentle, they begin to trust you. A goose will follow you. A cat will curl at your feet. A donkey will nudge your side for dates. These are small, living things that ask little but offer comfort. In the evening, you sometimes sing, quietly to yourself, a tune your mother taught you, or one you picked up from another worker. Songs pass among servants like secret gifts. They help the grinding go faster. The sweeping seem lighter. They are remembered when everything else is forgotten. Sometimes you fall ill. There is no physician for servants. If you are lucky, the mistress may send someone with honey and garlic. If not, you lie on your mat for a day, aching, sweating, hoping to recover before you are missed. Others bring you water. Quiet sympathy. The house does not pause. And sometimes someone dies, not from violence, but from the long wear of labor, from heat, from accident, a fall, a fever, a stillness that comes one morning. There are tears, yes, but briefly. The tasks continue. A new servant arrives. A name is forgotten, but in your heart, a quiet place remembers. What a marriage! Of children, some servants are permitted families. You might marry another servant, or live quietly with someone in another villa. Children born in service often remain there, helping, learning early. You may share your sleeping space with your child. Feed them soft bread dipped in date syrup. Whisper stories at night. Hope their path is lighter. There are stories, too, not the myths of gods alone, but folk tales pass around the courtyard. of crocodiles who speak in dreams, of a pot that refills itself, of a clever girl who tricked a prince. These stories float like fireflies in the darkness. They comfort, they inspire. The walls of the estate are high. Beyond them lies the city, the market, the docks. You rarely go. When you do, it is for errands. You carry a list. You keep your eyes low. You marvel at the bustle, bright cloth, spices in baskets, potters shaping vessels with swift, wet hands. You glimpse scribes, heads bent, soldiers laughing in doorways, perfume sellers fanning flies. You do not belong there, but still you look, you wonder. Back in the estate, night falls again. You eat with your hands. You share a jug of beer. You laugh when someone mimics the steward's stern voice. You look up at the stars and name them quietly. Orion, Sirius. You imagine them watching. In the stillness of night, you sometimes think of the river, its slow music, the reeds brushing your legs, the cool current tugging at your ankles. If you are lucky, once a week, you are allowed to go. You bathe. You float. You remember that your body is more than its labor. You are tired, but not broken. You are part of something older than any one life, a thread in a vast tapestry. And as you sleep, the house sleeps too. The breath of the estate is soft. The stone walls hum with heat, fading into silence. Tomorrow will come. You will rise again, and the sand will hold your footsteps briefly before the wind smooths them away. Tomorrow will come. You will rise again, and the sand will hold your footsteps briefly before the wind smooths them away. But for a moment longer, let us pause in this night. Let us dwell in the soft hush that follows a day of labor. Let us take one last look around the servants' courtyard, its familiar walls, its worn clay floor, the basket stacked neatly in the corner, the low table where hands often meet in shared meals and shared silence. Someone nearby is humming, a tune without words, older than memory. Another servant turns over on their mat, muttering softly in their sleep. The fire pit has gone dark, but its stones still carry warmth. A few embers glow like watching eyes. A jar of water sits under an overturned bowl to keep insects away. A piece of cloth hangs gently in the breeze. This is not a place of grandeur, but it is a place of life. You think briefly of the temple not far away, of the statues that stare without blinking, of the offerings laid at their feet, bread and beer and lotus blossoms. You've lit incense there at the edge of the outer court. You've swept its steps. You watch the priests move like phantoms in white linen, their voices low and rhythmic. You do not understand all their chants, but you feel their power. Sometimes on the walk home, you whisper your own prayer into the reeds, not to God with a name, but to the sky, the earth, the water, the fire, to the life that flows quietly and stubbornly through you. You pray not for riches, not for escape, but for softness, for strength, for another morning. And tomorrow comes. Always it comes. The dawn will stretch across the Nile again. The shadows will recede. The same pots will need washing. The same bread must be baked. The same child will cry. The same sandals must be strapped. And through it all, you will continue, a breath among many, a rhythm inside the great silence of time. This is your Egypt, not gilded, not sung of in hymns, but real as dust, as real as breath. And as the stars turn slowly above you, you drift deeper into sleep. The torchlight fades. The jars are full. The gods do not speak, but they are watching, and you are not forgotten. Even in the margins, even in the silence, you are part of something immense. Not only a life lived in service, but a life lived fully, with its own tastes and textures, with its own patterns and private hopes. You are not a statue in the master's garden. You are not the painted wall that cannot move. You are flesh and bone and breath, and that matters. Perhaps you have kept a secret, a carved token hidden beneath your mat, smooth by years of touch. Perhaps a ribbon, once bright blue, now faded with sweat and memory. You don't speak of it, but it anchors something inside you. A memory, a love, a promise, or maybe you whisper names into the night. names of the dead, names of those who once worked beside you. You do not know if the God's here, but still you whisper, because memory is a form of resistance, because silence, too, has meaning. Some nights, you dream of another life, not grand, not filled with riches, just a hut near the water, your own small plot of lentils, a quiet dog, a single lamp burning beside a low wall. In this dream, your hands are still calloused, your back still aches, but the days are your own. You do not wake to orders, only to light. But dreams drift, they soften at the edges. They float away with the scent of early morning ash. And when you do wake, tomorrow or the day after, it will be to the same sun, the same tools, the same floors to sweep. Yet even then, you will carry a part of that dream, not in defiance, but in dignity, in the way you smooth a blanket, in the way you lift a jar, in the way you pause before stepping into the master's house, just long enough to take a breath and remember, you are still here. You are still here. And that is everything. Even in the darkness before dawn, when the cold seeps up from the floor and the silence feels heavy, you are here. You are part of the pulse that moves unseen through every estate, temple, and granary. Without you, no fire would be lit, no food would be served, no walls would gleam. You are not the song, but the breath that allows the song to be sung. Some mornings, before anyone else stirs, you sit at the threshold of your quarters. The horizon is still gray. The stars are faint but visible. You run your fingers through the dust, drawing patterns that mean nothing and everything. Ripples like the river, triangles like mountains, lines like reeds. It is a kind of quiet prayer. Not be answered, only to be spoken. You feel the air shift. The desert begins to exhale, and you rise again. The master may not notice your face, but he notices when the wine is warm or the sandals missing. He notices the absence of service. That is your paradox. To be invisible in presence, unforgettable in absence. And you notice everything. You have learned to read moods from the angle of a shoulder, the pace of footsteps, the sharpness of a voice. You can sense when a guest is displeased before a word is spoken. You have learned to anticipate need before it is uttered. This, too, is a form of wisdom, not taught in schools, but carved into you over time. You age, slowly, quietly. The rhythm of work shapes your body. Your hands are strong. Your back bends sooner than it should, but you move with grace. There is knowledge in your limbs, not just of labor, but of life. There are times when you smile, not for others, not as duty, but to yourself. When a child you once bathed becomes old enough to speak your name with affection. When a loaf of bread bakes perfectly round. When you see a bee resting in a flower and are reminded that life continues, no matter how hard. You do not know what legacy you leave. Perhaps none. Perhaps only a worn path in the courtyard, or a pot repaired and used for years. Perhaps a song sung by someone who heard you humming, or the quiet, enduring memory held by another servant who once shared a meal with you beneath the stars. And when you sleep your final sleep, it may be without ceremony, no tomb inscriptions, no golden amulets, but the world you helped uphold will keep turning. The bread will rise, the floor will be swept, and someone, perhaps years from now, will sit where you once sat and whisper to the wind, "You are still here. You are always here." And that, too, is history. Part 2. The Silent Lives of the Unnamed, a servant in the house of Ramos. Now, let us narrow our gaze. From the broad rhythms of daily labor to a single story, reconstructed not from scrolls or epics, but from what remains in stone and paint. Faint lines, shadowy gestures, the corners of murals where servants kneel with baskets of fruit, jars of oil, folded cloths. No names inscribed, but a presence undeniable. We travel now to Thebes in the 18th dynasty. Here, in the tomb of Ramos, a powerful vizier who served under Pharaoh Amenhotep III. There is a scene, a banquet, guests reclining, musicians playing, incense trailing in curls from polished burners. At the edge of the scene, almost unnoticed, a young girl, kneeling, offering a plate. She is not named. She is not the focus, but she is there. We follow her, Not because history told us her name, but because she existed nonetheless. Let us imagine her life. She was born not far from this state, in the servant quarters that cluster at the rear of noble villas like silent shadows. Her mother served in the household before her, and perhaps her grandmother as well. The rhythms of her life were inherited. The way to tie a basket, the technique for folding linen just so, the precise blend of oils her mistress preferred. Each morning, she rose before dawn. She washed in water gathered the day before. She wrapped herself in simple linen and bound her hair neatly. By the time the villa stirred, she had already lit lamps, swept courtyards, and helped prepare cosmetics from ground minerals. Her tasks were many, and they shifted with the needs of the day. She knew how to prepare perfumed cones to be placed upon guests' heads, delicately scented wax that melted in the heat, releasing fragrance throughout the evening. She could mix eyeliner with kohl, using ivory applicators. She could comb and dress wigs, careful not to disturb the curls. During banquets, she moved like air, refilling wine, collecting empty plates, brushing away insects with a fan made of ostrich feathers. No one looked at her, but everyone expected her to be there, perfectly, silently, and she learned every glance between master and guest, every pause in a conversation. She knew when laughter was genuine, when a compliment was false. She read the room with the precision of survival. Her world was filled with soft sounds, the swish of linen, the creak of wood, the soft spill of water into jars, the crackle of fire warming the bathing rooms, the dull thud of grain pounding in mortars. There was beauty in her life, if quiet, a polished mirror catching the sun, the scent of myrrh in the cool morning air. A scrap of music hummed under her breath when alone. A moment of stillness as she watched a heron lift into the sky from the edge of the Nile. No record names her, but the walls remember her hands. The polished floors remember her footsteps, and the stone still bears a shadow of her silent offering, a silent witness to history. But let us not end her story so quickly, for her days were long, and her life was filled with textures we have not yet touched. Let us return to her mornings, not just as they began, but how they felt. How the cold of stone pressed against her feet as she stepped into the hallway. How the first shaft of light crept across the floors, filtered through the lattice of carved shutters. Let us follow her to the storerooms, where she helped inventory goods. Jars of dates sealed with wax, amphory of sweet wine marked with glyphs denoting their origin. She had to learn to recognize the difference between temple wine and estate wine, how to spot spoilage, how to pack fruits with sand to preserve them. It was not just physical labor, it was knowledge, learned through repetition and correction. Sometimes, she accompanied the house steward to the market. There, beneath awnings of faded linen and mats of straw, she observed trades. Copper vessels exchanged for bundles of linen. Smoked fish weighed beside baskets of herbs. She was not permitted to speak, unless spoken to, but she watched. She remembered. She learned who haggled with kindness and who did not. She learned the best time of day to find fresh figs. She once saw a crocodile skin offered for sale, brought up from the southern provinces. Its scales glittered. A merchant claimed it was a charm of protection. The steward declined, but she remembered the glint of it. Sometimes she dreamed of that glint, as if her mind had taken its texture and turned it into something mythic. Back in the estate, she sometimes helped the older women of the house with delicate repairs, embroidering the edge of a hem, tightening the cords of a sandal, grinding ochre for wall plaster. She took pride in these tasks, though they were thankless. They required precision, attention, silence. There were days when she was assigned to care for the estate's shrine, a modest altar in a sunlit room. She polished the figurines, replaced wilted offerings, lit incense cones, and she prayed not for riches but for safety, for calm days, for her hands to remain steady. The master, Ramos, rarely spoke to her directly. He might glance her way, offer a short command, but she was not part of his world. His robes were fine, his voice trained, his walk slow and assured. His wife was quieter. Her commands came through her attendants. But once, only once, she caught the mistress watching her with a look not unkind. It passed like a breeze, but it lingered. That, too, became part of her memory. She lived through seasons, flood and harvest, heat and respite. During the inundation, when the Nile spread out and the fields disappeared underwater, she helped reorganize a house. The servants shifted duties. More time was spent on domestic repair, pottery mended, tools sharpened, new mats woven. She began to understand the rhythm of things, not just by hour, but by year, when certain flowers bloomed, when the market slowed, when a festival was due to arrive. She remembered the grand procession of Opet, when the god Ammonius was carried in a gilded bark. She was not allowed near the sacred avenue, but she stood at a side street and saw the feathers and drums and flickering lights pass by. That night, she dreamed not of work or weeping, but of boats made of gold and rivers that sang. She sometimes missed her mother. Her memory had faded, but not the way her voice sounded when she sang while grinding grain. She tried to hum the same tunes, though her voice was softer. The women around her did not mock her for this. They, too, carried ghosts. There were moments when she was allowed to rest. During festivals, after meals were served and the guests had begun to nap, the servants would slip away. She would sit with her back to a warm wall, legs folded, eating a piece of honey-soaked bread. These moments were like pearls, small, round, luminous. And sometimes there was illness, coughs that would not go, fevers that lingered. Herbal remedies passed from hand to hand. Onion, garlic, dates soaked in beer. The old woman who served as healer knew how to draw out heat with damp linen and how to speak charms over sleeping heads. When the girl was sick, she lay still and listened to the sound of prayers whispered not to gods, but to health itself. There were funerals, too. Servants died, sometimes quietly, sometimes suddenly. Their burials were modest but marked. A jar, cloth, a name spoken aloud. The girl helped once. She carried water to wash the body. She placed a lotus in the hand of the deceased. It was a moment of gravity, a reminder. She imagined her own death sometimes, not with fear, but with the practical mind of a servant. Who would carry her? Who would remember? She hoped someone would place a flower in her hand. One day, she found a scrap of papyrus discarded in the storeroom, written lines of a hymn. She could not read them, but she ran her fingers over the ink. She kept the scrap, hid it beneath her mat. She did not know what the words meant, but she believed they mattered. In the final years of her life, if she lived them, her duties may have lightened. The new girls came younger, quicker. She took on teaching, showed them how to pour without spilling, how to speak without being heard, how to survive. And one day, perhaps a girl with clever hands and a strong back asked her why she stayed. She may have answered, "Because it is my place." Or she may have said nothing, only looked away and returned to her sweeping. Either way, the girl remembered. And when the mistress died and new masters came and the world shifted once again, that servant's name may have been forgotten, but not her shape, her rhythm, her knowledge, a breath behind the mural, a heartbeat in the stillness. Not lost, only quiet, a silent witness to history. But even as story fades into shadow, we continue to walk beside her, because her life, though never inscribed in formal record, was part of every banquet, every offering, every polished floor that history now marvels at. She saw the changes, too, as the palace grew quiet in Ramos' later years, as his political fortunes shifted with the currents of royal favor. Whispers passed between the senior staff. The Pharaohs' court was changing. The name of Akhenaten, the prince then known as Amenhotep IV, was being spoken more often. The temples bristled with quiet tension. Old gods, once praised without question, were spoken of with careful lips. The girl, now a woman, observed. She had always observed. But now she sensed deeper shifts, the weight of uncertainty, of unspoken anxiety. The house of Ramos still functioned, but servants shared wary glances. Rituals grew quieter. Guests became more formal and guarded. Even the food changed. Fewer imported delicacies, more local grains. She adjusted. She always had. When rooms went silent, she worked without speaking. When others wept in private, she offered bread without comment. Her strength was in her steadiness. She no longer rushed. She no longer flinched. She moved through her duties with grace honed not only by discipline, but by years of understanding the delicate balance of what it meant to serve. When the new household took over, perhaps a younger nobleman or a relative of Ramos, she did not resist. She packed her tools, folded her linen, and taught the new girls how the house breathed. She may have looked at the young mistress with quiet recognition. She had once served another woman here. She knew the rhythms. She would learn the new ones. In time, she may have moved to the temple precinct, offer a role in the household of priests, or been kept on as a senior attendant in the state's inner rooms, a place of quiet prestige. Trusted, unseen, and perhaps she died there, in her bed, under linen she had sewn. Perhaps another servant, younger, knelt beside her and sang the song she always hummed while sweeping. Perhaps the house steward made sure she was buried with care. A small stela set above her resting place. No long inscription, just her name, or maybe not even that. Maybe only a pot of incense placed beside the earth. A piece of her life released like smoke into the sky. But that life, like the smoke, lingered, rose, remained. And so we speak it now, not to correct history, but to honor what history never bothered to record. She lived, she worked, she remembered, and now we remember her. But let us not leave her yet. Her memory holds more. There were other servants in the house of Ramos, of course. Older ones who mumbled prayers while grinding grain. Young boys tasked with chasing flies from the tables. Girls who whispered secrets in the storerooms, braided each other's hair in brief moments of pause, and prayed under their breath as they pressed oil into the feet of guests. She knew them all, and in her way, cared for them. She showed them where the wine was stored and how to draw it without spilling. She taught them which reeds snapped best for cleaning and which could be woven into mats. She told them which parts of the house to step quietly in when the master was ill or tired or grieving. Sometimes she saw them come and go. Some stay for years, others only months. Some left to marry, to serve elsewhere, or to be given as gifts to other estates. Each departure left a trace. She had no parchment to write these memories on, but she carried them the tilt of her shoulders, the way she looked toward the outer gate at dusk. There were moments when she found solitude, in the garden before anyone woke, while tending plants that needed only sun and silence, or while rinsing robes in the corner basin, her hands moving through the water, her thoughts drifting with the ripples. These were sacred moments to her. No hymns, no icons, just the peace of doing something familiar and doing it well. She saw the children grow. Some of the master's sons grew tall and loud and forgot her name. Some of the daughters played with her when they were young, then grew silent and distant as they aged, as the structure of rank wedged its way between what was once affection and what had become duty. But one or two remembered. One perhaps even slipped her a bit of honeyed bread one evening, or smiled during a festival, when their roles blurred just enough to feel human. In one particularly long summer, the house was filled with tension. A building project delayed, supplies delayed, Ramos in a foul mood, guests arriving unannounced, servants dismissed for small things, carelessness, clumsiness, forgotten greetings. She kept her head low. She said little, but she watched, and she ensured others stayed safe, whispered warnings, stepped in where she could. She had learned to protect without drawing attention to herself. There was a boy once, a new servant, frightened and unsure, who knocked over a tray of pomegranates. The fruit rolled across the floor like scattered gems. He froze. She stepped forward, cleaned it quickly, took the blame. The boy stayed. Years later, he would pass her in the hall and lower his eyes, not out of fear, but gratitude. And when the festivals came again, she remembered the old ones, the songs sung beneath breath, the cloths hung in the doorway, the smell of sweet beer and date cakes. The older servants lit lamps in her honor now, not because she demanded it, but because they knew it taught them to endure. Her presence became like the pillars of the house, unseen but supporting. Guests might marvel at the quiet elegance of the service, the way the rooms were prepared with such care, but none would think of her. And that was as it had always been. But in the heart of the house, in the breath between one task and the next, she remained. A guide, a keeper, a thread in the loom. Even the house itself, with its painted walls and shaded corridors, seemed to know her touch. The room she had cleaned for years responded to her presence. The linen she folded took shape with ease beneath her hands. The courtyard garden, pruned in the same rhythm for decades, bloomed with the kind of harmony that can only come from quiet care. Sometimes, in the late afternoon when the sun burned low and golden, she would pause by the threshold and look toward the sycamore trees beyond the estate. She rarely left the grounds. Her world existed within these walls. But in that gaze was a kind of freedom. She watched the birds lift, the dust shimmer, the children from nearby homes race past with sticks and laughter. She did not envy them. She simply watched. She had her own rituals. At the end of each week, she swept her small corner 3 times, once for the past, once for the present, once for what was to come. She kept a broken bead under her mat, a gift once dropped by a child who had forgotten her name. To her, it meant continuity, a piece of a memory that could not be thrown away. There were nights when she couldn't sleep, when the wind shifted in an odd direction, or the household stirred with unfamiliar guests. On these nights, she would rise and light a single lamp, not bright enough to wake others, but just enough to cast a small, gentle glow. She would sit and look at her hands, cracked, calloused, strong. These were hands that had served, but also hands that had held, that had steadied, that had offered warmth. One winter, a sickness spread through the estate. Nothing as grave as a plague, but enough to silence laughter, to dim the pace of daily routines. She stayed well, perhaps through luck, perhaps through the habit of washing, of cleaning. She tended others, brought bowls of warm broth, sat beside the beds of fellow servants who coughed through the night. No one asked her to. She did not expect thanks. She moved like the hush that precedes healing. Years passed, decades. The murals on the estate walls faded slightly. Paint peeled at the corners. Ramos, now older, walked with a slower step. His voice, once booming with authority, now trembled slightly when speaking in the mornings. Still, the estate continued. Still, she moved through its passageways. She became a point of quiet respect. Not fear, not authority in the way nobles wielded it, but a different kind of presence. When a new servant joined, they were told to watch her, learn from her, not because she would teach with words, but because her every movement was a lesson. She had lived through floods and droughts, through joyous festivals and years of hardship. She had outlasted many who once outranked her, had seen masters replaced and children grown. Her face, now lined with age, still held calm. And then one day, she was not in her corner. The servants noticed first. A cup left unwashed, a cloth not folded. Nothing dramatic, just the absence of a rhythm long trusted. They found her seated by the doorway to the garden, eyes closed, face turned toward the sun, the lamp beside her still warm. The breeze had stirred the cloth across her lap. There was no grand burial, but someone laid flowers at her resting place. Someone lit incense. Someone whispered her name. And that was enough, because she had been the soul of the house. And when the house breathed again the next day, her rhythm remained in the air, not forgotten, simply returned. But even this is not the end of her presence. Let us walk through more of her world. The quiet spaces between ceremonies, the repetition of preparation, the subtle balancing act of servitude that never ceased. For to truly understand a servant's life in a noble Egyptian household, we must stay longer. We must notice more. Consider the changing seasons in Thebes. During the Achae, the inundation, when the Nile overflowed its banks, the estate took on a different mood. Fields could not be worked. Servants turned inward, focusing on craft, inventory, spiritual maintenance. Repairs were made. Accounts tallied. She took stock of linens, folding each with care, darning holes, setting aside pieces that could be made into smaller cloth for children or for kitchen use. Nothing was wasted. Everything had another life. And then came Parade, the growing season. The estate hummed with energy again. The steward barked orders. Young men were sent to the granaries. Women wove new baskets. She organized the workroom, cleaned tools, labeled containers with reed ink symbols so others would not mistake spell for emmer, fenugreek for coriander. She never learned to write, not properly, but she recognized symbols. She had watched scribes often enough to know the difference between careless strokes and those made with confidence. She practiced in secret once, with a bit of charcoal on a pottery shard. Just once. Her name. She tucked the shard away and never showed anyone. That act, those crooked glyphs, meant something, a moment of self. By the time she was old enough to be called mother by the youngest workers, even if she had no children of her own, she had learned to navigate every corner of the estate. She knew how to soothe a noble child's tantrum with a cool cloth and the right word, how to remove a wine stain from a linen tunic without bleaching its trim, how to mend the corner of a reed mat with rushes cut at the right season so it would not fray again. She also remembered laughter, moments when a heavy day was brightened by a song, when a story passed from mouth to mouth, growing funnier with each telling. There was a boy who always imitated the cook's voice. He did it so well, even the steward once laughed. She scolded him when others were watching, but gave him a date cake later, when no one saw. For your talent, she said simply. The courtyard, too, carried her imprint. She had planted mint and henna by the water basin. She knew which clay pots cracked in the heat and which survived season after season. She trained younger girls to stack them in rows, smaller inside larger, lip to lip, shoulder to shoulder. And there was a house's cat, sleek, clever, with amber eyes. It chose to sleep near her mat, and no one questioned it. She fed it quietly. Once, it brought her a lizard, whole and glistening, laid at her feet like a tribute. She buried it with care. Every so often, a traveling priest or scholar came through, asking questions about the estate. The steward would answer, but if they lingered long enough, their eyes might drift to her. How long has she been here? Someone asked once. The steward shrugged. Longer than I've been in charge. She did not speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was the answer. She had lived through a fire once. A small one, but frightening. A spark in the kitchen caught the edge of an oil-soaked cloth. Flames leapt fast. Servants screamed. It was she who threw sand first. She who pushed the pot down, smothered the cloth. She who helped calm the others. When it was over, and the steward arrived red-faced and panicked, he found her already reorganizing the shelves. Next time, she told the cook quietly, don't leave the jar so close to the flame. Her warnings were heeded, not because she threatened, but because she had earned the trust of every corner. And through it all, the mural remained. In the banquet hall of Ramos' tomb, painted long before her final days, that little servant girl, her younger self, still knelt with her offering. Generations would look at the fresco and focus on the nobles, the musicians, the gods painted at the top. Few eyes would drift down. Few would pause at the curve of her shoulder, the basket in her arms. But if they did, if they looked closely, they would see the detail given to her hem, to the line of her braid. A small act of honor by the artist. A gesture, a quiet immortality. Not in gold, not in inscription, but in pigment, in form. The servant who outlived memory. The presence that never asked to be seen, but was never truly absent. A life not marked in papyrus, but in breath, in rhythm, in the echo of sandals on swept stone. Yet even breath leaves traces. Even silence holds stories. Let us go deeper still. Imagine now a time of transition, when the old steward grew sick and the state trembled on the edge of change. She had seen it before. The anxiety, the tightened voices, the uncertainty in the kitchens. A new steward would be appointed. Perhaps someone younger, harsher, someone who would not yet understand the delicate balance required to keep peace among the living parts of the household. It was in these moments that she became more than a servant. She became a memory bearer, a vessel of tradition, the one who remembered how things had been done before and how they could be done again. Quietly, she offered advice. She guided with glances, with example, with the placement of a broom, the tone of a well-timed phrase. And she endured, because survival for a servant was not just an obedience. It was an adaptability, in dignity preserved without recognition, in the ability to vanish and remain at once. She adapted to new faces, new rules, new rhythms, all while preserving the deeper rhythm underneath. The pulse of the household that only a few could feel and fewer still could hold. She understood hierarchy. She had lived it, felt its weight, but she also knew where it bent ever so slightly. When to speak gently to a crying child of the mistress, even when instructed to stay away, when to offer a second serving to a favorite guest, because kindness whispered louder than silence. These were her arts, not taught, not requested, simply done. And in the twilight of her life, there were moments of reflection. She had known joy, the scent of the orange blossom drifting over the courtyard at mid-morning, the soft sound of oil poured into a lamp, the rare but precious laugh of the mistress when something truly delighted her, and grief, too, the burial of a friend who had once shared her room, the dismissal of a kind girl accused of theft, the night she discovered a broken mirror in the hall and, without asking, swept up the pieces before anyone could be blamed. She had collected these fragments and carried them like invisible amulets. They weighed nothing, yet they were the heaviest things she owned. Her final years were quieter. She was no longer expected to carry jugs, though she sometimes did out of habit. Younger servants brought her things now, not out of duty, but out of respect. She ate slower, slept earlier, sat longer in the shade, and when she spoke, the others listened. She told stories, not about herself, never directly, but of old days, of tricks for softening linen, of recipes for wound poultices, of songs sung long ago. She passed down not facts, but rhythm, memory, texture, and one day, a new girl asked, "Who is she?" And the answer came, not from a master, not from a record, but from another servant. She's always been here. No title, no date, just presence. The kind that lingers long after footsteps fade. But still, let us not look away. The estate of Ramos, like many noble households in Thebes, was a machine of unspoken gears. At the surface, protocol, elegance, refinement. Beneath, sweat, discipline, and constant movement. And she, the servant whose name history never carved, was part of that unseen machinery, one cog among many, yet irreplaceable to those who truly watched. She knew the pattern of light across the courtyard walls, how it fell on different columns of the seasons, how the dust rose in low spirals by the hour of afternoon tea. She knew the creak of the door that never closed properly in winter, the soft knock of the mason at the outer gate who never announced himself aloud. These details, meaningless to those above, meant everything to the smooth running of life below. There were days when nothing went as planned. A storm would rise over the desert without warning. A feast would be ordered last minute. A guest would arrive 3 hours early. In those moments, it was she who held the house together. Not loudly, not with command, but by simply doing, adjusting the arrangements, finding extra linens, sending the youngest runner to the market with a pouch of barley and precise instructions. She didn't shout. She didn't flinch. She simply worked. And beneath all that duty, there was imagination. Sometimes, when she stirred the flour in the kitchen, she imagined herself as the woman in the Tale Hathor, who outwitted a king by disguising herself as a baker. When she sat in the garden, plucking herbs for poultices, she whispered charms under her breath, as if the gods might lend her a little of their quiet strength. Her world was small, but her thoughts wandered beyond it. She had, tucked in a folded bit of cloth at the base of her sleeping mat, a shard of blue glaze. It had once been part of a scarab bead, perhaps fallen from a mistress's necklace or brought home from a marketplace sweep. She had kept it, blue as the Nile, cool and smooth, on restless nights. She held it in her palm until her breath softened. One season, during the festival of the beautiful valley, the entire household made offerings to the ancestors. The nobles brought wreaths of lotus and platters of meat to their family tombs. But she and others like her slipped away quietly and laid a single strip of cloth, dyed with ochre, at the edge of the cemetery path. No name written, but her hands had touched it. That, she believed, was enough. Her faith was quiet, not grand temple hymns, but private words muttered like wind through reeds. She believed the dead listened. She believed that somewhere the work of a life would be weighed not by titles or inscriptions, but by constancy, by kindness, by the small, enduring rhythm of care. And in the later years, when her knees no longer bent as they once had, when rising from a crouch took effort and time, she still polished the brass fixtures near the entrance. Not because she had to, but because she always had, because they gleamed in the light, and it pleased her to see them catch the sun. One morning, a young steward from another estate arrived to observe the household. He toured the storerooms, took notes, asked questions. At one point, he saw her and paused. "That one," he asked, "what is her role?" The current steward, who had been there only 5 years, hesitated, then said, "She knows everything." The visitor blinked. "What is her title?" Another servant, standing nearby, simply replied, "We listened to her." It was the only answer that mattered. And yet there was more. She had become something of a living archive, not of dates and battles, but of systems, routines, the way each vessel was to be stored, the sequence of meals for every season, the way certain guests prefer their rooms arranged. She carried these things not on scrolls, but in her body, her memory, her reflexes. Her knowledge was never recited. It flowed. There were days when she was asked to train others. Young girls just arrived, fresh from small villages along the riverbank, frightened, unsure, eyes darting at every command. She would take them aside, show them how to carry a tray so that nothing clattered, how to fold linen, so the corners aligned like the edge of a temple stone. She didn't scold. She repeated, demonstrated, and when the girls tried again and got it wrong, she only said, "Once more, you'll feel it soon." The work shaped her, but not only in calluses and creases. It gave her rhythm, intuition, patience. She began to anticipate things before they were spoken. If a storm was coming, she covered the sleeping quarters in extra cloth without being asked. If the master was silent over breakfast, she instructed the kitchen to keep lunch simple, not because she had been told, but because she saw, she felt. She did not consider herself wise, but others did. The older servants, those who remembered the flood years, the years of hunger, the visit of the royal census, they would nod to her across the courtyard, a gesture small and deep with respect. Even the cook, who spoke in shouts and wielded spoons like scepters, softened her tone when speaking to her. She once found a child, the youngest daughter of the household, weeping behind a curtain, a favorite toy lost. A servant scolded. She did not ask questions. She simply reached into her sleeve and withdrew a small clay doll, warm but whole, and placed it into the girl's hands. The crying stopped. No one spoke of it afterward, but the girl began to greet her each morning with a glance and a quiet smile. She became the invisible thread that held small kindnesses together. On holy days, when the household gathered to offer thanks, she stood at the edge of the ceremony, not in the circle of priests and nobles, but near the storage room door, where she could still hear the chants and smell the sweet smoke of incense. She did not need to be seen to be part of it. She belonged in her own way. Even her silences carried weight. When disputes arose between workers, over tasks, over sleeping space, over clashing duties, she never raised her voice. She waited, and then, when the moment was right, she would speak one sentence. Measured, firm, and that would be the end of it. You might say she was a memory of the estate. She remembered which rooms had seen weddings and which had heard arguments. She remembered the season the fig tree failed to bear fruit, and how the household adjusted their meals. She remembered the names of the cats that had come and gone, the patterns of wear on the tiles, the crack in the wall that had grown just slightly each year. And because she remembered, she helped others remember. Part 3. False doors and empty names, interpreting the invisible lives. Now we shift our gaze, not to the breath and rhythm of a single life, but to the fragments left behind. Clay shards, tomb paintings, unnamed statues, stone doorways that open onto nothing but silence. This is a part of the story where archaeology meets intuition, where facts begin to fade and interpretation begins. For the lives of servants, those who cooked and cleaned, who swept and soothed and labored in the shadows, were almost never written down, and yet they remain beneath the surface. In ancient Egyptian tombs, We often find what is known as a false door, a carved slab of stone made to look like a doorway, usually on the western wall of a tomb. To the ancient Egyptians, this was not just decoration. It was a threshold, a place through which the spirit of the deceased could pass into the afterlife. Offerings were placed before it, prayers spoken, meals left in hope and remembrance, but whose names were carved upon these doors. Not the names of servants, not usually. And yet, sometimes, just sometimes, we find them. A man named Nabisha, listed as he who poured water for the overseer's sealers. A woman named Tia, attendant the lady of the house. A child, carved in miniature near the feet of a priest, labeled only the houseborn. They are there, not in gold leaf, not in the center, but at the edges, and it is from those edges that we learn. We find their tools, scrapers, spindle whorls, weaving weights, items buried with them not for status, but for continuity. The tools of service became symbols of identity. Their function had outlived them. We study their bones, the wear in the knees, the strain on the spine, the grooves in the teeth from endless chewing of coarse bread, the signs of infection never treated, of limbs healed improperly, of long hours hunched beneath sun or ceiling. These are the truths the body keeps, long after the name is gone. In Deir el-Medina, the village of craftsmen and tomb builders, we find walls scratched with prayers and jokes, records and disputes. Even there, among skilled artisans, the names of servants are rare, but when they appear, it is often in relation to someone else. Wash the linen of the house. Carry papyrus for the scribe. Context defines them, but does not erase them. One ostracon, a broken shard used for writing, lists food rations. It includes allocation for a woman named Bakay. No title, no rank, just her name and the amount of grain she was owed. That grain, perhaps, was her pay, or her sustenance. A unit of value exchanged for the endless work of tending, lifting, preparing. In that small line, we see her life flicker into view. Servants in ancient Egypt lived within layers, social, religious, architectural. They moved through courtyards where they could never sit. They prepared meals they would never eat. They polished surfaces they were forbidden to touch with bare hands. But still they left echoes. We see them in the fingerprints pressed into drying clay, in the accidental brush of a red pigment on the hem of a painted robe, in the uneven tile set just slightly askew in a nobleman's floor, laid perhaps by a tired apprentice at dusk. They are not absent from history. They are merely silent in the places we were taught to look. They exist in the wear patterns on stone stairs, steps slightly bowed in the middle from centuries of sandaled feet, many of which belong not to priests or nobles, but to the ones who served them, in the reused vessels, reinscribed by poorer hands. In the hearth stood embedded in the bricks of servant quarters far from the reliefs of gods. Sometimes archaeologists find skeletons buried without grave goods, no amulets, no scrolls, no funerary masks, and yet they are buried facing west, their bodies carefully arranged. Someone, even in poverty, took time to honor their passing. Someone who may have known them, a fellow servant, a friend, a child. There are stories, passed in whispers even among modern Egyptologists, of carved graffiti hidden in passageways. Tiny scratch symbols in dark corners, likely made by laborers during tomb construction. Names perhaps, or prayers. Marks of presence. The small, defiant act of saying, I was here, and they were. They were there when the floors were swept before a pharaoh's feast, when a newborn cried in a noble's home, when the Nile crested and threatened the grain stores, when the incense burned low during a ritual. They were there, hands dusted with flour, with pigment, with the dust of monuments not yet finished. They were there, beneath the gold, and in the echoes of their absence, we begin to hear them. For in the patterns of repetition, in the wear of the floor tiles, in the repairs made to tools passed from hand to hand, we begin to see not just labor, but humanity. Some servants may have had names carved in passing. Others are preserved only in the faint brushstroke of a mural, the tilt of a figure holding a tray, the shadow kneeling before a more prominent face. But all carried stories. Stories that historians, archaeologists, and artists must reconstruct with care. Today, When scholars recreate models of ancient households, they try to honor these invisible lives. They include the quarters behind the main villa, the kitchens, the laundry rooms, the narrow hallways where voices echoed and wood smoke clung to the beams. They map out where bread was baked, where water jars stood cooling in the shade, where footsteps padded at dawn. Museums now sometimes include plaques not only for the tomb owner, but for the workers who built it. In recent years, more attention is given to the servant communities, those who supported elite households, temple life, and administrative centers. Still, most of what we have is interpretive. We read into posture, tool marks, burial positions. We piece together the shape of a life from what was left behind by others. A servant who tended the embalming linens may have touched more royal skin than any priest, but we may never know her name. And yet, there is something deeply human in the attempt. The attempt to say, someone was here. Someone worked these halls, slept in these quarters, swept this stone. Someone woke early, tied their linen at the waist, and stepped out into a world not made for them, but made by them. So when we walk through ancient ruins, palaces, temples, tombs, we might remember to look low, to the thresholds, the corners, the back rooms, to notice the spaces where the light falls soft and where footprints are worn deep into stone. We might notice the world not of the remembered, but of the remembering, not of the carved, but of the carried. We might finally see them, but even this seeing is only partial. To imagine the daily life of these invisible hands, we must also imagine the sounds, smells, and textures that surrounded them. The hiss of steam as water met hot stone in the bathhouse. The squeak of wicker as baskets were lifted and set down. The flick of a reed brush over uneven clay floors. The dull ache of fingers pressed long into stone mortars. We must hear the faint songs they hummed, if not the words, then the rhythm. Simple tunes passed down through generations, never written, but held in muscle and memory. Songs for the rising sun, for the grinding of grain, for the cleaning of floors. We must feel the weight of their tools. Wooden ladles worn smooth by repetition. Bronze knives notched from years of cutting fish and figs. Earthen jars that warmed slowly in the morning light. We must feel the press of linen against the neck and the dust that never quite left the skin, no matter how often they washed. And we must remember that even within the category of servant, there were differences. Some were born into servitude. Others entered it through debt, war, or hunger. Some were enslaved. Others free, yet tethered by duty. Some rose in rank, becoming stewards, midwives, cooks of renown. Others remained anonymous, assigned only a corner in a shared room, a handful of barley for their wage, and the freedom to sleep undisturbed if lucky. Some held on to amulets, small gods tucked under mats, secret offerings left beside a tree. Others held on to nothing but their routines, which became prayers of their own. Still others found solace in the community they built among themselves. In the back courtyards, under moonlight, they shared jokes, compared blisters, traded herbs for aches and worries. They braided each other's hair. They warned each other which masters were in foul moods. They formed their own hierarchies, their own quiet support systems, resilient and invisible, but strong. And these networks of care, of shared labor, of whispered support, are part of the archaeology too. Though they do not leave artifacts, they leave patterns in shared spaces, in common wear on tools, in the repeated repairs made by the same hands. They remind us that history is not just about monuments and rulers, but about the webs of interdependence that held the living world together. So when we gaze upon a golden mask or a towering temple, we might pause and ask, not just who lies beneath or who is worshipped there, but who carried the stones, who boiled the glue, who polished the floor before the ceremony, who stood in silence, just off to the side, holding a bowl of oil. And sometimes they stood nowhere at all, at least in the written record, because many of those lives did not even earn a mention on ostraca or walls. Their names were carried only in the breath of others, and when those others were gone, the names faded too. But history, like memory, is porous. Sometimes, through sheer persistence of pattern, something seeps through. Like the servant figurines buried with nobles, Ashabdi they were called, tiny card workers with baskets and hoes, made to labor in the afterlife on behalf of the elite. But what if In carving them, someone remembered a real person, a servant they had once known. What if the curve of the shoulder or the twist of the head wasn't generic, but borrowed from memory? We do not know, but the possibility lingers. And there are other remnants too. In the kitchen, refused piles behind large estates. Fish bones, charred grain, worn utensils. We glimpse the die of those who did not sit at the table. We learn what they cooked, what they patched, what they made last just one more day. Through analysis of soot patterns on walls, we can tell where fires burned hottest, where ovens were repaired. Through pollen and seeds, we know what herbs were grown outside serving quarters, not for display, but for healing. Even the layout of ancient homes tells a quiet story. The spatial divide between family and staff. The single narrow corridor that led to servant dormitories. The corner wash basin where dozens bathe in shifts. The small doorways designed not for grandeur, but for passage. Each of these details adds the portrait, not of an individual, but of a class, a world of people who kept other people's lives moving. And though they were rarely praised, they shaped the rhythm of the day. They lit the fires before dawn and doused them after dusk. They stood in ceremonies but were not named in the prayers. They live at the edge of celebration and mourning, always present, never central. It is easy to forget them, but it is right to remember. Even now, in the silence of museums, in the sterile light of display cases, they wait, not for glory, but for recognition, for a gaze that lingers a little longer on the footprint beside the tomb, the stitching on the hem, the nick on the ladle's edge. For someone to say, you were not invisible, and though we cannot resurrect their voices, we can honor their echoes. Even in the temples of great kings, where walls bloom with hieroglyphs recounting divine lineage and epic conquest, there are brushstrokes, corrections, faded corners with a hand of a lesser worker past. Perhaps a servant carried the pigments. Perhaps they mixed the ochre with water drawn at dawn. Perhaps the entire scene would not exist without their quiet labor. They remain unseen but necessary. Some scholars now argue that certain anonymous figures in tomb paintings, those smaller, bent at the waist, bearing vessels or leading cattle, may not be idealized depictions of generic laborers, but artistic memory of actual individuals. Over time, stylized, abstracted, but once, perhaps, real. And there's something solemn in that. To be remembered not by name, but by motion, by action, by gesture. The way a hand carries a jug, the turn of a foot on stone, the softness of a back bent in familiarity. Some archaeologists have taken to naming them, not officially, but quietly, in notes. The weaver of House X, the boy in the courtyard, not to assign false identity, but to restore some dignity, to remind themselves that these were lives, not tools, that behind every structure stood dozens of people whose breath warmed its walls. Even the soil tells stories, where repeated kneeling compacted the earth, where ash settled from evening fires, where beads fell from woven cords and were trampled underfoot, layer upon layer of uncelebrated routine, turned to sediment, turned to history. And now, as we study, as we listen to the silence, we begin to notice something else, continuity. That same rhythm of hidden labor persists today, in kitchens, in workshops, in fields and stairwells and early morning streets. The ancient servant is not gone. Their story changes shape, but endures. In every hand that wipes the counter, that lays the mat, that folds a blanket without being asked. So when we speak of the glory of Egypt, the pyramids, the temples, the tombs, let us pause. Let us whisper, too, of those who swept the sand from the threshold before the nobleman walked through, of those who caught the candle wax before it dripped, of those who listened, who bore, who waited, for it is in that whisper that history becomes whole. And perhaps, most gently of all, we come to understand that silence is not absence. Silence is sometimes a sanctuary, a form of resilience. The quiet strength of those who built lives in the shadows, who carved routines into stone without leaving their names behind. The unnamed were not unimportant. They were simply unrecorded, and yet they shaped every chamber, every corridor, every moment of so-called greatness. In the museums that hold ancient linen, we find the warp and weft of fabric woven by tired fingers, stitches that held longer than expected. The tension in the thread tells us something about the hand that pulled it. Was it rushed? Careful? Experienced? These are the metrics of a life lived in labor, visible in pattern and strain. Excavations near workmen's villages reveal not only tools, but toys. Dolls made of scraps. Spinning tops of discarded pottery. These were not the objects of the elite. They belonged to the children of those who served. And in those artifacts, we find joy, not just toil. A father shaping a figure for his daughter at dusk. A mother twisting thread into a little braid for play. We even find laughter, graffiti scratched into limestone walls, jokes and caricatures drawn with casual flair. These images tell a world where humanity endured amid constraint. They remind us that those who served were not only shoulders bent to work, but eyes that sparkled in quiet rebellion, in sheer humor, in fleeting moments of rest. And so, the invisible becomes visible, not by uncovering a grand secret, but by paying attention to the ordinary, by tracing the overlooked. The false doors once stood as gateways for the spirits of the elite, but perhaps they are also doors for us, inviting us to cross through and glimpse the world of those who stood just outside the frame, those whose stories were never meant to be told, but who lived them nonetheless, with grace, with patience, and with the endurance of dust itself. And still, we reach deeper. Consider the spaces where they lived, modest quarters tucked behind or below the grandeur, low ceilings, fewer windows, the scent of oils and smoke lingering in every woven fiber. These rooms were not adorned with paint or carved with prayers, but they bore witness to another kind of devotion, the everyday resilience of those who washed, who baked, who stitched the rhythm of the household together. Some researchers now use experimental archaeology, recreating the tools, the baskets, the looms, to better understand how the servants worked, how long it took to grind enough barley for one meal, how hot the kitchens became under the summer sun. These reenactments are not entertainment. They're acts of historical empathy, meant to reanimate forgotten gestures and give substance to ghostly records. A servant's life was marked by constant motion, the lifting of water jugs from the Nile's edge, the slow, careful transport of oil through narrow stone halls, the rearranging of reed mats, of sandals, of expectations. They moved like currents beneath the visible structure of society, essential but rarely named. And within this motion was a kind of dignity, not loud, not recognized, but deeply rooted in constancy. These were people who found grace not in titles, but in touch, in the smoothing of wrinkles from garments, in the stacking of clay jars, in the silent correction of what others left askew. Even their grief went unrecorded. No lamentations carved into stele for them. And yet grief must have passed through those spaces. When a child died, when a companion was beaten, when the seasons failed. We imagine them lighting a lamp, placing a small offering beside it, whispering a name into the dark. And laughter, too, must have danced through those back passages. A spilled bowl prompting a chain of giggles. A clever impersonation of a master. A song sung off-key but with gusto. These moments remind us that history, even when heavy, was also human. At a site near Saqqara, archaeologists discovered a burial that puzzled them. It was humble, a pit grave, no inscriptions. But the bones were buried with careful orientation. At the feet, a small woven pouch containing beads and dried herbs. Not treasure, memory. Perhaps a gift from someone who could not give more. Perhaps a servant, honored in the only way possible. This, too, is history. Not the history of conquest or decree, but the quiet record of care. And when we walk through modern reconstructions, virtual tours, museum dioramas, we should ask who dusted the dioramas of imagined floors, who cooked the imagined stew, who waited for praise that never came. Because if we fail to ask, we repeat the forgetting. And perhaps, most importantly, we begin to understand that to study ancient Egypt with justice is not only to study its grandeur, but to sit in its silence. To sit with the stories that are harder to hear, the ones that never reach the surface unless we bend down, press our ear to the ground, and listen long enough. To listen not for the voice of the Pharaoh, but for the footsteps behind him. And perhaps it is in the smallest things that we come closest to those footsteps. In a chipped alabaster bowl found near a servant's quarter, stained with a dark residue of repeated use, archaeologists noticed a tiny thumbprint, fired into the surface before the vessel had dried. A careless mistake, perhaps, but also a mark, a trace, a fingerprint of the forgotten, a reminder that the hand which touched that clay thousands of years ago belonged to someone with a body, a breath, a routine, someone who woke one morning with aching joints and reached out to do their job as they had done the day before. In another excavation, close to the workers' village at Amarna, a woven mat was uncovered, astonishing in its preservation. The strands were coarse, but the weaving was deliberate, tight, even proud. These were not throwaway items. These were made with care, likely to be used until they fell apart. And yet, here it remained, the imprint of its maker's rhythm encoded in each strand. A servant's skill immortalized not in gold, but in grass. One of the few surviving personal letters from ancient Egypt, scrawled hastily on a piece of scrap pottery, complains about the water carrier who does not come on time. The letter was not addressed to a king or even an official. It was a complaint from one ordinary man to another. And though the servant is not named, their role is immortalized, testimony to the expectation, the frustration, and by implication, the importance of their presence. These glimpses, fleeting, partial, yet undeniably human, begin to form a mosaic of the invisible. And while we cannot know their every thought or moment, we begin to sense something more enduring than memory, the structure of their lives. Their days followed the sun. The clatter of morning tasks began before dawn, long before the elite rose from their beds. Fires were lit, bread was shaped, laundry was scrubbed and wrung and hung to dry in the thickening heat. The dust on their sandals was not ceremonial. It was lived and earned with each step, through courtyards and side rooms. Someone cared enough to bury them well, to lay them facing the morning sun, to whisper words that would not survive the centuries but which mattered deeply in that moment. In this light, their invisibility becomes not erasure, but invitation, to look deeper, to imagine more fully, to recognize that history's foundations are laid not only by kings, but by countless unnamed souls who serve quietly, persistently, with lives full of weight and worth. Part 4. The contrast of comfort, a world divided by linen and stone. Let us now turn our gaze toward the other side of the palace walls, to the alabaster halls, where polished sandals touched only the cleanest tiles, where linen robes were freshly laundered each day, scented with imported oils, where banquets stretched into the night, and the burdens of labor were borne entirely by others. The lives of Egypt's elite, the priests, administrators, and nobility, moved at a different pace under a different sun. Their days were marked not by the rising of the bread oven, but by audiences, rituals, and recorded legacy. In this world, even leisure was structured, catalogued, and exalted. While servants bowed and waited, nobles read letters and dictated records that would last for millennia. The contrast was stark, and designed to be so. Egyptian architecture itself emphasized separation. Private gardens surrounded by walls. Columns placed to restrict access. Doors that opened only to those with titles. Even the tombs of the wealthy were erected not merely to celebrate life, but to enforce remembrance, to dominate the landscape and declare status long after death. Inside these tombs, scenes of feasting and family love abound, but they are curated visions, selective narratives. Servants are often pictured too, but only as background, as if to say, I lived in beauty because others served in silence. What did these elites think of those who served them? Some may have been fond of their staff. There are letters that speak of trusted household attendants. But even trust was not a quality. Most relationships were transactional, layered with expectation, and the ever-present threat of replacement or punishment. To be a lead in ancient Egypt was to be buffered from hardship by design. Disease, hunger, and toil were things others endured. The elite preserved their bodies with perfumes and rituals, while others bent under the weight of their needs. This disparity was not incidental. It was the structure itself. A society built to exalt a few, dependent on the quiet, constant labor of the many. And yet, even in this divide, a thread connects both worlds. For the comfort of the elite was not self-sustaining. It had to be refilled, reshaped, restored, each day by unseen hands. A prince could not step into his robe unless someone had woven it. A high priest could not begin a ritual unless someone had cleaned the temple floor. The elite may have slept on carved bed with linen sheets, but it was the hands of others that made those nights soft. Even the food, so abundantly displayed in tomb art, passed through dozens of hands before it ever reached the lips of the elite. Farmers sowed the grain, millers ground the flour, bakers shaped the dough, cooks stirred the pots. Each gesture carried out beneath the weight of obligation. We find inventories from estate households, meticulous records listing oils, perfumes, cloths, and foodstuff, rarely acknowledging the people who managed these goods. Their labor was presumed, embedded in the system, invisible because it was expected, and there were hierarchies among the elite, too. Some nobles looked down on other bureaucrats. Rank determined how many servants one could command, and how many goods one was entitled to in state redistribution. In this way, wealth was both visible and measured, in property and privacy, in how many hands touched one's day. But contrast always reveals. When we look at the elite, we see the inverse of the servant's life. Where one group's body was perfumed, the other's was blistered. Where one slept in silence, the other rose in darkness. Where one was praised in hieroglyph, the other was erased by time. And yet, the great irony is that the immortality sought by the elite, through tombs, statues, inscriptions, was made possible by those whose names were never carved. Every statue lifted into place, every scroll that survived the centuries, owes its existence to someone who carried, cleaned, arranged, and preserved. Without their constant tending, the legacy of the elite would have long crumbled into sand. In this way, the story of comfort is incomplete without the story of labor. A bed is only restful because someone laid it. A temple only sacred because someone scrubbed its floors. And so, in the final light of history, we begin to see the two not as separate, but as reflections. One cannot exist without the other. The world of linen and the world of stone, both shaped, held, and carried forward by human hands. Imagine now a banquet in full motion, golden platters, sweet wines, rich meats, the music playing softly. The nobles recline and gesture for more. But beyond the edges of that candlelit scene, there is another world. Feet move quickly through corridors. Hands wipe spills, refill jars, carry commands. These two worlds, though joined in space, never meet in dignity. Even the silence in elite rooms was curated. It was the silence of doors closing behind attendants, of servants waiting behind screens, of burdens carried away before they were seen. The illusion of tranquility rested on a practiced choreography of labor. For every hieroglyph praising the generosity of a noble, there's an untold story of the one who made the offering possible. And so when we visit the monuments, the grand ruins of Egypt, we might walk past columns and colonnades, admire the symmetry, marvel at the precision. But somewhere in the mortar lies a fingerprint. In the corner of the hall, a smooth stone worn by footsteps. In the shadow of the statue, a place where someone once knelt, cloth in hand, to polish the eternal. Let us not forget them. Let us remember that even the most exalted dream of permanence depends on those who lived without promise of remembrance. And as we prepare to leave this quiet study of opposites, let us carry forward the idea that beneath every visible legacy lies an invisible foundation, that for every figure enshrined in history, countless others stood in the background, holding the weight. They were the hands behind the curtain, the breath behind the ritual, the presence behind the power. Their stories, though unrecorded, are embedded in the very structure of the past. And when we choose to see both, the linen and the stone, we come closer to a fuller understanding of what it meant to live, to serve, and to endure. So when your eyes close tonight and your breath deepens into stillness, remember, even dreams rest upon unseen labor. The world may seem effortless when it is well kept, but every quiet moment is scaffolded by someone else's care. To be remembered, to be seen, is not only a matter of records and names, but of attention. And now, as the stars rise softly above the desert, the temples sink into shadow, and the last servant's footsteps fade across the courtyard stone. We honor them, not with inscriptions, but with presence. And perhaps, just perhaps, the next time you see a grand hall or a finely painted wall, Your mind will linger on the quiet figures who lit the oil lamps and swept the dust before the guests arrived. For in their hands lived the rhythm of Egypt. In their footsteps echoed the pulse of a civilization. And what if, beyond the historical record, there were other truths still waiting to be imagined? Some scholars have speculated that elite families may have relied on certain favored servants not only for physical labor, but also as spiritual intermediaries, quiet participants in private rituals, or carriers of secrets meant only for the most trusted ears. Could there have been a class of domestic servants who were considered invisible confidants? We do not yet know. In the hush of candlelit rooms, did some servants silently absorb the grief of households, knowing the mistress's tears before anyone else did? Might a young girl tasked with preparing oils have overheard sacred preparations, or even sensed patterns in the timing of births, deaths, or omens that the household priest did not? Archaeologists sometimes find personal objects buried near elite homes. Simple amulets, carved beads, shards of clay dolls. Were these left by children of the elite, or by the daughters of servants who lived in the shadows of grand chambers? Could servant families have developed their own silent rituals to counterbalance the elite's claim to the divine? There are theories still debated that suggest the walls of private estates might have borne murals painted not only by state artisans, but by gifted servants themselves, quietly trained in techniques passed from one unrecognized generation to another. Could there be ghost painters in the story of Egyptian art? And what of music? Some propose that lullabies and melodies used by servants to soothe children may have entered the aristocratic household's emotional memory, later becoming part of elite funerary rites without credit. Perhaps, then, a fragment of servant song lingers in the oldest prayers we have. We may never find full evidence for these things. And yet, the gaps in the record are not always silent. They murmur possibilities. They beckon us to listen closely to the quiet places, to imagine lives that left few marks, but shaped the world in unseen ways. To dream history is not to invent it, but to widen its lens. And so we allow ourselves in this final moment to honor not only what we know, but what may have been. For history, like stone, holds both the chisel and the echo. Let us imagine, for a moment, a great house overlooking the Nile. Its walls are adorned with fine pigments. The estate is lush, with palms swaying gently and reed fences swaddling the compound. A nobleman reclines in the shade, his eyes heavy-lidded from lotus wine. But beneath this peaceful veneer, life thrums in another register. Servants move like the wind, present, yet never centered. Consider a young servant boy assigned to the garden. His task is to tend the sacred sycamore that shades the house. He waters it at dawn and dusk. But what thoughts fill his mind as he watches the roots drink? Does he imagine the tree whispering to the gods on his behalf? Perhaps he's named it in his mind and speaks to it in hushed tones, asking questions no one else will answer. Or picture an elderly nursemaid who once held the noble's children in her arms. Years pass, and now she limps through corridors, nearly invisible. But the children remember her voice, her songs, her touch, and in their dreams, her memory lingers longer than their father's name. She becomes a kind of spiritual ancestor, unmarked by stone, yet monumental in the inner life of those she nurtured. Might such figures have created their own sacred spaces, hidden from view? Perhaps beneath the house's stairs or behind the storage jars. They built tiny shrines, a bit of bread, a clay figure, a whispered hope. These spaces, never recorded, might have borne more truth than any royal inscription. Some hypothesize that servants passed messages through gestures, tones, and rhythm. A tap of the bowl meant, "Be careful today." A towel folded in a particular way could convey approval or grief. These small codes may have formed a language as subtle and profound as hieroglyphs, a lexicon of silence. And in the kitchens amid smoke and spice were stories exchanged, unwritten tales of old love, small rebellions, ghost sightings, and dreams. Was there a tradition of kitchen mythology, a folklore all their own, never recorded by scribes, but carried in memory from one generation to the next? We might wonder, too, about their thoughts on death. While the elite prepared elaborate tombs, did the servants dream of burial at all? Or did they imagine themselves becoming part of the earth, their energy flowing into the river, into the harvest, into the wind? A different kind of eternity, no less sacred. Perhaps, in rare moments of quiet, They stepped into the courtyard and looked up at the stars, not with awe alone, but with recognition. For while priests studied the heavens to track time and harvest, perhaps a servant simply gazed and whispered a name of a lost parent, a child gone too soon, or a friend who had disappeared. And in that gesture, claimed the sky for their own. And so we find, in this final reverie, that to live in the margins is not to live without meaning. The record may be sparse, but the possibilities are infinite. Each object left behind, a hairpin, a worn sandal, a scrap of linen, becomes not just a clue, but an invitation to feel. To step into the quiet spaces of history is to walk barefoot through the dust of forgotten lives. And if we pause and breathe and listen, not just with our ears, but with our sense of wonder, we begin to hear them again, not with shouts, but with murmurs, not with inscriptions, but with presence. But let us carry the thought still further. What within those private domains, hidden from temple and tomb, there existed informal constellations of meaning, known only to the servants who dwell within them? Could these homes have hosted emotional geographies, in which certain doorways signified punishment, certain staircases grief, and some sunlit corners quiet forgiveness? A mosaic of space and feeling, read only by those who walked it daily. What emotions did the servants associate with the elite? Fear, surely, but also envy, contempt, and perhaps even pity. To witness a master drunk with power or mistress cruel without cause might have sharpened a servant's view of the world. Might they have whispered their judgments into the open wind, hoping the gods were more just than men? There are theories, rarely voiced aloud in scholarly circles, that some elite households depended upon servant networks to preserve internal stability, not through command, but through quiet corrections. A misplaced item returned before its absence was noticed. A soft word whispered to avert a quarrel. These gentle interferences, unnamed and unthanked, may have served as a kind of domestic equilibrium, and perhaps they shared dreams, too, in silence or in shadow. Dreams of faraway homes, of lives unburdened, of rivers that took them somewhere kinder, or dreams of justice, not grand cosmic justice, but small ones. A child healed, a cruel overseer dismissed, a moment of laughter reclaimed amid fatigue. Can we know these dreams? Not precisely, but we can suspect them, for they are the same dreams whispered throughout time, in every servant's breath, across every land. And now, as this part draws to a close, let us not harden history into stone. Let us keep it soft, like linen washed by a river's edge, creased by use, warmed by sun, and shaped by human hands. Yet still we wonder, what lived within their minds? Those whose names did not echo through history? Perhaps the servant who lit the morning lamps imagined he was awakening a sleeping god, not merely illuminating a corridor. Perhaps the girl who swept the steps whispered tiny poems to herself with every stroke of her broom. These interior lives, silent, private, entirely undocumented, formed the real architecture of ancient Egypt. Beneath the visible stones was a structure of thoughts. Imagine the internal monologue of a servant walking through the courtyard at dusk. The day's task complete, her limbs aching, but her mind wide and wandering. She thinks of her mother's songs, of the way the wind sounds against the plaster walls. She remembers a time when she laughed without watching who was listening. Now, consider the cook stirring lentils over a low flame. The aroma rises, and with it, a memory, a feast long ago, when he was still a child at his own village's harvest festival. In that memory is joy, now distant, but still bright. Does he hum the song his sister used to sing? Does he stir in rhythm with that recollection? These small recollections may have been the only luxury afforded to them. Rich inner lives cultivated in quiet. Perhaps each morning walk to draw water became a meditation. Each moment kneeling in service, a place where thought slipped inward into imagined lands of peace. We might imagine, too, a servant who pauses each night to speak to the moon, not for ritual, but for company. The moon becomes a confidant, a presence that listens without commanding, without judgment. Today I was scolded, she might say. Or, today I saw something beautiful, a boy laughing, a palm tree reflected in water. And over time, her nightly conversations shape her sense of the divine, not the gods of temples and scribes, but a private spirituality of light and silence. A God not of power, but of patience. These imagined inner lives are not fantasy. They are possibility. Reflections drawn gently from the shared truths of human experience. Wherever labor has existed, so has daydreaming. Wherever duty, so too has longing. There may have been moments when two servants, meeting briefly in a hallway, exchanged nothing but a glance, but in that glance was recognition, a whole world of understanding, exhaustion, irony, endurance. And though they could not speak freely, perhaps that glance stayed with them all day, a little tethered to another soul. Even the objects they carried might have held personal meaning, a favorite broom, a chipped water jar that reminded them of home, a worn leather sandal that fit only their foot just so. These were not treasures by elite standards, but they were memory anchors, soul objects, and in dreams, where the mind wanders freely, perhaps they walked roads that no pharaoh ever dared tread, roads made of light, roads that led to a place with no commands, no punishments, no master's voice, a place where they were simply themselves, fully and gently alive. If we cannot find their words, perhaps we can listen for their silences. If we cannot touch their temples, perhaps we can feel the soft trace of their thoughts, still drifting like desert wind through time. What might have felt like to carry a noble woman's jewelry box each morning? Its weight not just of gold, but of expectation, scrutiny, and ritual. Did the servant marvel at the shimmer of amethyst, or simply see another hour standing still, arms aching beneath the sun? Perhaps the woman who combed the mistress's hair did so, while imagining what would feel like to wear it free and unbound, to walk outside without watching her steps, without listening for commands, to be touched only by the wind and not by obligation. And what about the boys who ran messages through the palace? Did they compete with each other in silent games, try and touch the wall before the third torch, or memorizing which rooms smelled of incense, which of fear? Might they have known more of the palace than any scribe? Its moods, its silences, its secret pathways? Could it be that some found hidden joy even within servitude? Not joy in the labor, but joy in resistance, quiet, internal, unseen. A moment of stillness when no one was watching, a scrap of fabric stitched with a hidden mark, a small stone placed on a windowsill just so, a message only they understood. Did they look out past the walls and wonder, will anyone ever know we were here? Not the kings, not the priests, but us. Will anyone care that I lit the candles, that I turned the wheel, that I scrubbed the steps so they would shine for procession? Tonight, perhaps we answer, yes, because the heart of history is not only in monuments, but in memory, not only in what was written, but what was lived. And though we cannot draw their faces or write their names, we can imagine their dreams, their small rebellions, their longings folded quietly into the rhythm of their days. So let the linen remain soft. Let the stone remember their footsteps. Let the silence carry their breath. And let us, who now sleep in comfort, feel the weight of their unseen hands, still holding the world aloft. But even now, there is more to wonder, more quiet turns of the imagination that deepen the mystery of those lives. Imagine a young boy born into servitude within the estate. He has never known the freedom of walking beyond the garden wall. And yet, at night, he dreams of the river, the Nile, without ever having stood at its bank. In his dreams, it sings to him, not in language, but in rhythm, a lullaby from a world he has only glimpsed through doorways. Perhaps he sees birds flying overhead and wonders, if he were a bird, what horizon would he chase? Would he soar beyond the desert's end, where no names are spoken and all people walk barefoot on clouds? Imagine a girl who, from her place in the weaving house, listens carefully to every conversation she is not supposed to hear. She collects voices like threads, braiding them into stories of her own. One day, she begins to hum her own tales, tunes that rise and fall with the sound of the loom. The other weavers notice, but say nothing. Her songs become a comfort, a kind of resistance stitched with melody. Did any of them fall in love? We have no letters, no inscriptions, no painted scenes of servant courtship. But how could they not? When humans live closely, laboring side by side, bonds form, glances soften, hands brush. Perhaps they love quietly, with gestures, A shared figure, a warm corner during rest. A whispered name passed between breaths. And grief? When one disappeared, dismissed, punished, or worse, how did the others mourn? Perhaps a dish was placed on the table for a day too long. Perhaps a single necklace was hidden in memory. Grief, in such lives, had to be small to survive. But it was there, folded neatly between the chores. Let us imagine, too, how they might have imagined us. Could any of them have guessed that thousands of years later, we would sit in warm homes and wonder about them? That their footsteps in the courtyard might echo in our thoughts? Perhaps not. And yet, perhaps some did hope. Perhaps one servant, pausing to drink beneath a fig tree, thought, "May someone remember I lived.